Today we're going to be looking at Level 2, Dementia Awareness. We're still working through Unit 1, and as you can see from the picture here, we're going to be looking at the brain. So your aims and objectives of today's session are to describe the ways that different parts of the brain are affected by dementia. I have here some important words for this unit. This is going to relate to all of the work that you're doing. So dementia is a disability caused by diseases or conditions that affect the brain and that causes problems with the way the brain functions. The word symptoms means a physical or mental indicator of a disease or injury. Cerebral hemispheres, the key areas in the brain that are affected by the conditions and diseases that result in dementia, and they make up most of the brain. Depression, so severe dejection accompanied by feelings of hopelessness and being inadequate. Stress, being under physical, mental or emotional pressure. Delirium is mental confusion and changing levels of consciousness. And risk factors are the elements in someone's history or lifestyle that increase or decrease the chances of developing a particular condition. So these words relate to the entire unit, not just to today's session. So let's have a think about how we can understand what dementia is. So with dementia, it is not just one type of condition, okay? So dementia instead, there are over 100 different conditions that can cause the symptoms of dementia. So when we're thinking about the causes of dementia, you can also think of that as the types of dementia if you find that easier. So the causes of dementia that we're going to be looking at throughout this unit are Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. So each of these cause dementia, and they do it very differently. So how does dementia affect the brain? So firstly, to understand how dementia could affect the brain, we need to understand how the brain works. So here we have a picture of the brain. The frontal lobe, let's begin with that, the orange part. So the frontal lobe is at the front of your brain, so it's where your forehead is. So the frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, for memory, for behaviour, and for judgment. Just behind that is the blue section, which is called the parietal lobe. This is responsible for language and touch. Behind that, so at the back of your brain, there is an occipital lobe. This is responsible for vision, so to help you to see. Underneath of that, there is a part of the brain called the cerebellum. This is responsible for balance and coordination. Connected to that is your brain stem. So your brain stem is responsible for breathing, for your heart rate, and to control your temperature. At the side of your brain, we have the yellow part. So this is just beside your eyes, the temporal lobe, where your temples are. So this part of the brain is responsible for hearing, for learning, and for your feelings. So the normal brain is the most complex organ in the body. We can view it as a control centre because it controls everything that we do. It controls your movement, your speech, your memory, and your behaviour. Our brain keeps our bodies working, and it controls how we experience the world through our senses. So how we see, how we hear, how we touch and feel things, how we smell, how we taste. It's made up of billions and billions of nerve cells. These are cells with long tentacles and look a bit like an octopus. The tentacles connect cells to each other and they pass messages through chemicals and tiny electrical currents. So what happens if the brain is diseased or injured? If disease or injury breaks the connections between these cells, then they will die, and the functions that they performed will stop. Some cells in our bodies can regrow if they're injured, like if you think about if you burned your skin, it would heal, or if it's been cut, it would scab over and heal. In our brain, the nerve cells can't do that, they can't regrow, so they will die and stop functioning. Dementia is a disease that affects these nerve cells, so it affects those little tentacles that we talked about on the last slide. So dementia affects the brain by causing nerve cells to die. And because those nerve cells cannot be repaired, dementia causes permanent cell death within the brain. As we age, the brain will shrink. The neurons and neurotransmitters can change. The blood vessels in the brain can change as well. And we can get inflammation in our brain. But people age in different ways, and some people notice themselves steadily decline, whilst others continue to improve themselves. This is why not all people will develop dementia, but the risk does steadily increase with age. So we looked at the word cerebral hemispheres before, okay? Just going to explain a bit more about that. So cerebral hemispheres, this is the grey matter that's divided into 4 lobes, and each of these lobes do a different job. We're going to have a look at those shortly. We then have the limbic system. This is at the centre of your brain, and it's responsible for learning and memory. We have the cerebellum, which we saw on that picture before, and this controls your balance and movement and even your posture. And the brain stem right at the bottom of your brain. This controls the body functions like breathing, blood pressure and heartbeat. So let's have a look at those areas of the cerebral hemispheres. These are the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. The cerebral hemispheres of the brain make up the most of the brain, and they are the key areas that are affected by conditions and diseases that result in dementia. You may sometimes hear the word or term grey matter, and when people say the grey matter in your brain, what they're talking about is the cerebral hemispheres that you can see there on the list. So what does the parietal lobe do? So the parietal lobe, it manages language and touch. It can also manage the complex activities like detailed movements and tasks such like spelling words and calculating numbers. So how can this lobe be affected by dementia? Any damage to this area means that people may begin to lose skills that they once had in being able to work out finances and writing letters, because it's affecting their language and their touch. Here we have some more information about the parietal lobe, what it does and how it's affected. Please pause this video here to read this part. The occipital lobe. So this area of the brain controls our vision, so it helps us to see. So how is it affected by dementia? So if there is damage to the occipital lobe, it will affect our sight. But remember, not everybody that has problems with their sight will have problems with their occipital lobe that are caused by dementia. So I myself wear glasses, as you can probably see on my picture. That doesn't mean that I have a problem with my occipital lobe due to dementia, but it can have an effect with people with dementia. So here I have some more information about the occipital lobe, what it does and how it's affected. Please pause this video to have a read of this section. The frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe, what does it do? It controls our behaviour, it controls how we think, it controls our memory and our movement. So how could this area be affected by dementia? So if there's damage from a disease in this part of the brain, then there are changes in people's usual behaviour. So if somebody was normally very quiet in life, they could all of a sudden become very loud. If someone is particularly outgoing and friendly, they might become shy and withdrawn. Or it could be the opposite. Somebody very shy could become very outgoing all of a sudden. A person who was relaxed and laid back might become very worried and anxious about everything in life. So it can have quite dramatic effects on somebody's behaviour. Here's some more information about the frontal lobe and what it does and how it could be affected by dementia. Please pause this video here to have a read of this slide. The temporal lobe. So what does the temporal lobe do? The temporal lobe controls hearing, learning and feelings, and it also provides important functions for language, emotion and memory. So how can this be affected by dementia? So if there is damage in our temporal lobe, it can cause difficulty with speech and communication. People might find it difficult to remember words for objects. They might find it difficult to recall sounds for everyday objects, like a dog barking or something. It might be difficult to join or remain in a conversation because they're not able to follow that conversation on. It can also affect emotions. So because the temporal lobe controls our feelings, people could become very angry or very sad for no obvious reason. And this can be very difficult for not only the individual with dementia, but also for those around them, so their loved ones, their family and their friends. So here's some more information about the temporal lobe and what it does and how it can be affected by dementia. Please pause this slide here to have a read of this slide. This video here to read this slide. I would now like you to answer the question about the brain. So your question is to describe the key functions of the brain that are affected by dementia. So you need to show your understanding of how dementia can affect the 4 areas of the brain: the parietal, occipital, frontal and temporal lobes. For each area of the brain, you need to show that you understand what their normal function is and how dementia can either change or affect that area and function. You should now be able to describe the ways that the different parts of the brain are affected by dementia.